So I hope all of you are having a wonderful morning at the Bangalore Lit Fest. Yes. So it's normally customary to begin by thanking the Lit Fest people for inviting me and so on and so forth. But actually, I am going to start thanking. I am going to begin by thanking them, but more so for actually getting me to read these books. And I think that's perhaps been the biggest thing for me in the last couple of weeks since I found out that I was going to moderate this session. To read Jyotsna Mohan's book, Pratap, and to read Kavitha Rao's book, Spies, Lies and Allies, I love the title, was a wonderful experience in the last couple of weeks. I've really enjoyed reading them, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with both of them. And I hope to pass on some of my delights to you through them, and I hope to see all of you buy these books at the festival bookstore as soon as the session is over. So on that note, may I start? Okay, now both your books, right? Your book entirely and a large part of your book are about what in India we would call the revolutionary movement, right? Revolutionaries, the British call them terrorists, we call them revolutionaries. And if I were to make a sweeping statement, it might not be entirely true, but I think it's largely true. When we think freedom movement in India, we think of the main strand. We think of Nehru, Gandhi, Patel. We think of the non-violent movement that they led. We think of things like the Salt Satyagraha, the non-cooperation movement, Quit India. But this strand that both of you have written about in both your books, this kind of ran parallel to the main strand, right? But it has kind of remained in the shadows, right? More so your characters. Virendranath Chattopadhyay, who came of an illustrious family, younger brother of the very famous Sarojini Naidu, and M.N. Roy. Both have somewhat been forgotten. In your case, your grandfather Virendra, right, who worked with Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh, of course, has got his fair share of limelight, but what we forget is that there was a whole bunch of people working along with him. They have been forgotten. So my first question to both of you is this. Why have they been forgotten at all? They did their part, they took great risks, they really sacrificed their lives, they put themselves out there, but they haven't quite won that recognition. You want to start, Kavitha?
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you also to Bangalore Lit Fest for hosting me. This is my hometown. It's great to be back in this very historic venue. So coming to your question, Karthik, the two heroes of my book, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, who as you said was the brother of Sarojini Naidu, and M.N. Roy, Chatto, as I call him, had this very exciting and checkered career. Right from the beginning, he was a revolutionary. He took the revolutionary path. And he was pursued all across Europe, from London to Berlin to Stockholm to Paris, and eventually he ended up in Soviet Russia, where he was executed by Stalin, Joseph Stalin, in Stalin's Great Purge, which nobody knew about. His fate was unknown because, Stalin's misdeeds were covered up, even, they were unknown even to his own citizens, and they only came out years later when the KGB archives were thrown open. And that was when Chatto's fate was discovered. So Chatto sort of, completely disappeared from view. And the other reason was that both Chatto and, M.N. Roy, his rival and his, in many ways, they savagely criticized both Gandhi and Nehru. In fact, Chatto called Sarojini Naidu, his own sister, a puppet in the hands of Gandhi and Nehru, because Gandhi and Nehru were not radical enough for Chatto and Roy. And Roy, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you can see it in the book, the exact quote. Roy believed that Nehru was, a vain, attention-seeking demagogue. Those were his exact words. And he also didn't have much in common with Gandhi, because Gandhi was, a religious Puritan, and M.N. Roy was a hedonist and completely irreligious. So they were sort of, completely shut out from the, the history of the freedom movement. And to be fair, they also managed to fight with just about everybody, because M.N. Roy's obituary by The Guardian says that, he just pursued one doomed cause after the other. which is a very accurate summary of his career. And they were just not on the winning side in any, in any battle or, of consequence, which is why they were sort of completely erased from memory.
What about your grandfather, Virendra, who worked with Bhagat Singh, who was instrumental in that whole plot and so on? He's also kind of not been acknowledged for that role. He won acclaim in other spheres.
Hi everyone, and thank you for patiently sitting here and listening to us. I have to agree a little bit with Kavitha. I have the same strain that I've seen in my family, always speaking, the voice of doom, so to speak. So that kind of also puts you away. But my grandfather's story is remarkable, I would say that anyway. I'm the granddaughter, but he was 17 when he first went to jail. His father was amongst the most well-known newspaper editors of pre-independent India in Lahore, a newspaper called Pratap that was launched in 1919. And he was the privileged son of a very, very famous newspaper editor. And yet he chose to leave it all and fight for India's independence. The first time he went to jail was when he was 17, arrested for the Saunders case. So Bhagat Singh escaped Lahore after the shooting, but it was my grandfather who was actually picked up and tortured. His story was parallel, or, Bhagat Singh was such a big force to reckon with, so to speak, Karthik, that everybody else, unki chhai mein jaise kehte hain, just stayed in that. Also, the other thing is, once independence happened, although he was in jail, I think 9 times. So by the time he was 22, he'd been jailed 7 times. Along with being in jail on the 23rd of March 1931, that's the day that Bhagat Singh was hanged at the Lahore jail. My grandfather also was coincidentally in the same jail. It's a very rare first-person account of what he saw of Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev coming out and they're hanging. But after all that, after independence happened, everybody kind of went into their grooves, so to speak. So if you are a regional person, then you get typecast into that regionalism. And for us, the newspaper was Urdu, then there was a Hindi newspaper. So it became a predominantly North Indian story, which it never was. Courage and bravery and patriotism is never, can never be stereotyped. Also, there's another thing about that generation after independence, or the whole partition, when you kind of lose everything. You fought for everything. You've got what you needed, and yet you've lost everything personally. That generation chose to keep quiet. I think there's a lot of that missing in what we have been able to take out of that community feel. What we have been able to figure out here, what we've been able to add here to my grandfather's story, and it's a remarkable story. It's not just about jail, it's about, we were hit by terrorists in Punjab, a bomb blast that took place in our newspaper. In fact, my grandfather's whole story was that, okay, I thought that I'd done everything that I had to do for helping to get India independence. I didn't think that in independent India, I would be, faced with so many challenges. But 2 employees of the newspaper died in the office when the blast happened, when the bomb exploded. So but yet, he didn't speak much about it later. So it's about what we could also get about the sources. I think that generation, Karthik, just believed that what we have faced, and why burden the other generation with it?
That's interesting. I mean, you do so much and you actually do expect no reward for it.
We literally had to, get things out of him. It's remarkable, right? When the Punjab story happened, and he was on the hit list of the terrorists every other day, being chased by terrorists, him, my grandfather, my father. And we had to tell him that, stop, you've got to change the route. The police are complaining that you don't change your route every day. He said, look, I've made bombs in, British Raj. I'm not scared.
Okay, my question to you, Kavitha, is clearly Chatto and Roy that do not feature prominently in most stories, right? When I heard about Chatto a little bit, Roy a little bit, what motivated you to kind of pursue this story? Why did you write the book in net?
So my last book, also historical nonfiction, it was called Lady Doctors. It was about India's first women doctors from the 1860s to the 1930s. And after that, I wanted to write a really exciting nonfiction book. Something that read, nonfiction that read like fiction. Something really thrilling, fast paced, almost like, Day of the Jackal. Now, obviously, all historical figures do not lend themselves to this treatment. But Chato and Roy, my protagonists, actually did lead incredibly exciting lives. I mean, their lives were like, it's like truth is stranger than fiction. And, a complete contrast to, say, all the others that we hear about, like Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Sarojini Naidu herself. Because as I said, Chato was a revolutionary right from his young days. He was pursued across Europe. He was always one, step ahead of the British Secret Service. There was a scene, there's a chapter in my book called A Dagger, a Revolver, and a Bottle of Chloroform, which is what the British Secret Service had with them when they tried to capture Chato in Switzerland. And he escaped. And then he figured in a Somerset Maugham story. He was the spy Chandra Lal. It's a story called Julia Lazari. He was immortalized there. And, after doing all these exciting things, he met such a bizarre end because he was a communist and yet he was executed by Joseph Stalin in Stalin's Great Purge for no particular reason. It's just that Joseph Stalin was, at that time sort of lashing out at all foreigners. So he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So he met such a bizarre end for, his ilk. So that was very exciting to me. The second thing was M.N. Roy had an equally exciting life, and we know him, I think in Bengal, he's known mostly as the founder of Indian communism, or at least one of the founders. And he also founded the Mexican Communist Party, despite not being Mexican, because he went to Mexico. He was also traveled across the world. They were one of the true cosmopolitans. Chato spoke some 12 to 14 languages. M.N. Roy spoke about 5 to 6 languages. And M.N. Roy, eventually, he just escaped being Stalin's Great Purge. He was also in Moscow at the time. He ended up helping to smuggle the Russian crown jewels after the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, they had just the most exciting lives. It should be a Netflix show. So that's why I wanted to write it. I couldn't not write the book because all these great anecdotes, great people. But I should say right from the start, because people always ask me, they're like, well, why should I read a book about two communists? Because that was what their leanings were. But it's not a book about communist theory at all. I have deliberately steered clear of communist theory, endless archival research. It's a book about two exciting people, and it's a book about being human, about trying, about failing, about trying again. Because that is what they did. They tried, they failed quite badly. They tried again, they failed again. That's what it's about.
So here's an odd question. Since their lives were so exciting, did you feel your pulse racing as you scout through the archives reading about their lives?
Absolutely.
Absolutely?
Absolutely.
That's a rare thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is a complete, Chato's family survives, but they don't remember anything of him. So while I was trudging through the archives at the British Library in London, I was just thinking, what's going to happen next? I obviously knew what's going to happen, but still, I was still thinking, well, what's going to happen next? How is he going to get out of this pickle? And it's just such a thrilling story. And also there are a lot of exciting women around them as well, because they led very colorful lives. So lots of women, lots of, girlfriends and things like that as well. So.
In your case, I'm assuming dinner time conversation where your grandfather's exploits and so on, and that's where the germ of the book began in your mind, maybe when you were a young teenager or journalist starting out on her career.
Karthik, I always knew there was a story. I always knew, but my grandfather was a tough nut to crack. So the only time he said was, I remember sitting next to him and I was fretting about my math exam, and I must have been in class 6 or 7. And I said, I'm not going to pass it. And he said, look, if I can pass my BA and MA in jail, you can jolly well do this. So I said, I better go down and, finish this up. But it's very similar to Kavitha's stories, There were so many hits and misses in his life. There have been a few reviewers who've called it a historical thriller. I don't quite know how to take that. But the instances of the hits and the misses, then brings into context these revolutionaries and the violence that's, spoken about. And you have to wonder really how different, when we speak about violence, that is not violence. That is just a bunch of people who had an idea versus what we see is violence today, which is even in civil society. And to give you an instance, they decided one fine day that they want to emulate the Bengal revolutionaries. So the Punjab revolutionaries and the Bengal revolutionaries kind of worked in tandem. And they said, they're doing such great work and we need to up our game. So my grandfather and two other people said, look, we are going to go and we are going to do a dhamaka. There has to be something that is big. So they went and scouted some popular club in Lahore and said, how can we just go and throw a bomb there? They kind of realized that they were being evicted every second. Then they thought, okay, we're going to shoot the governor. And so they thought that, okay, there's the national convocation of the Punjab University and the governor comes there and we're going to shoot him. They decided, how do we emulate the Bengal revolutionaries further? We are going to get a woman to shoot. So they got a woman who said, okay, I'll shoot. And then they thought, okay, now how are we going to train her? We are not trained ourselves. So they dropped the idea. She was very upset about it. Then they finally got another man. They trained him however they could. Now, how do they enter the convocation hall? So my grandfather was asked to go and get a pass. You've got to get a pass. So he went scouting in his neighborhood, a very privileged neighborhood. Everybody was studying in this good college. And he managed to get it. And then he comes back, and in the excitement, the other revolutionaries had to change the name. They were erasing it, they spoiled the card. So he had to go back and find another card. So these are the things that happened in the background. How did the guys stand up to shoot the governor? The shooting happened. But there were so many people, wheels within wheels that were working, often failing. And yet, a part of that whole thing called nationalism and patriotism, which came together in a sense that we don't see today, Karthik.
No, what struck me about, and this is entirely something that I observed when I was reading your books, is they were kind of operating in silos. They were operating, within themselves and so on. What if they'd actually organized better? What if they had actually come together, and perhaps created an organization and then had a longer term strategy, which is perhaps what the Congress did in some way or the other. Maybe we would have got independence sooner. Is it right to speculate on those lines?
They were already working with Chandrasekhar Azad. So part of that HRSA and everything, I think in that time, the only thing that was working for them was that they were asked to read a lot. So they were asked to read all the, literature coming out of Russia was predominantly one of the things that they were tested on. So before you could enter that little cycle, you had to be tested on your readings. And these things were smuggled in newspapers, these little pamphlets were smuggled to them. But I think this is as best as they could as being revolutionaries, because that then makes them stand out from what the Congress was doing and what, where Gandhi was. Although if, say, Bhagat Singh, I think if he were to have formed an entity in today's India, I think he'd be called anti-national.
Very likely. No, what would you say? I mean...
The events of my book are a little before Bhagat Singh, right? Like during the time that Chatto and Roy were calling for revolution, the Congress was all about moderation, asking for dominion status for India. Nobody was calling for full independence at that time, because Chatto started calling for full independence as early as 1903, influenced by Savarkar, V.D. Savarkar, with whom he shared a house in London. So, it was quite early. And talking about whether more unity could have achieved more, there were a lot of people in that space. The other people that Chatto and Roy were closely involved with were the Ghadar movement, which was in the, the US, in the California and the Pacific Northwest. But there was so much dissension amongst all of them. Like Chatto and Roy were arch enemies because both of them were vying for the attention of Lenin. Because after the Russian Revolution, everybody thought that, this is where we need to look. We need to look to the Bolsheviks to rescue us, to help us win independence from the British. And both Chatto and Roy were vying for Lenin's attention, and as it turned out, Roy won. Roy became Lenin's protege and young man, and he was high up in the Communist Party, and for many years before he was expelled. And Chatto was, just sort of discarded. And it's hard to say whether we would have got independence earlier. I think not, because I honestly think that, some people have read this book and told me you're very down on Gandhi. And I'm not actually down on Gandhi. I'm writing this sort of through the eyes of Chatto and Roy, the way they are looking at Gandhi. But in another sphere, I'm not at all down on Gandhi, because I honestly do believe that it was only Gandhi with Satyagraha, with Ahimsa, who could unite the entire country and make our cause appealing to the wider world. And this is why Nehru did not, Chatto was always telling Nehru, you need to break away from Gandhi, you need to be more radical, because he believed that Gandhi was, upper class, upper caste, banyas, and will take India down that road and will not look after the peasants, despite what he said. And Nehru, in many ways, was so different from Gandhi, secular, and not into did not necessarily believe that India lives in its villages and all that. But he stuck with Gandhi for the sake of unity, because he knew that Gandhi is the only one who can sway a very poor nation. I mean, Chatto and Roy had very idealistic views about India. Roy, especially, he had, he left communism and he started this theory called radical humanism, which sounds great. But even today in 2025, this land where imagine there's no religion, like Lenin said. It's very Leninish in its view. So, and it's just not possible in a country where, religion and caste play such an important role. It was way too idealistic. So I don't think that would have worked in the long run. So, yeah.
One more question for you, specific to Roy, and then I'll come to you. Roy seems to have led a very interesting life, in the sense that he began somewhere, went somewhere else, went somewhere else. I don't mean places. I mean ideologically. And then towards the end of his life, or towards during the 1940s, he actually had that opportunity to get in on the mainstream freedom struggle. And like you said, he fought with everyone then, and then he kind of became a lone wolf.
Yeah.
What do you think was going on? I mean, why couldn't he kind of see that they were all working together for the common cause?
I mean, M.N. Roy was such a fascinating man. He deserves an entire 3-volume biography in itself. And there have been many written about him. More scholarly, so not for the lay reader perhaps. Because here is a man who is almost completely uneducated. He left school at 14. He was a bomb thrower. He calls himself a bomb thrower. At 14, he was throwing bombs at various British officials. He had no education, no family. He left India quite young and moved around the world educating himself, reading about communist theory. He started out as a communist, then he got disillusioned with communism despite rising to the high ranks, and then he was expelled from the Communist Party. And then he tried, you're right, he came back to India. He was imprisoned for 6 years, tried to get back into the Congress Party, but just could not compromise. He was such an uncompromising bugger. I mean, that's all I can say. That's the way to, because Gandhi, when he came out from jail, Gandhi said, okay, come, Gandhi and Nehru said, come, let's join the Congress Party. And Gandhi invited M.N. Roy to attend a prayer meeting. Any other person would just have gone. M.N. Roy said, no, I can't do that. I don't believe in God. Okay, so, and then that kind of, destroyed their relations. And Gandhi said, I don't think you really need to be too involved in the freedom movement. You just, And M.N. Roy wrote some 25 books. I mean, one of the huge challenges of this book was condensing M.N. Roy into quite a slim book. And I'm not sure whether I have managed it, because he wrote some 20 books, so many pamphlets, so much material. There was not a thing that happened in the world that M.N. Roy did not have an opinion on it, and had to write about it. So he was just a very uncompromising person, and he had very idealistic views, I think. So that's really it, yeah.
No, I want to come back to something that you said earlier and kind of relate it to your grandfather's career, so to speak. You said if Bhagat Singh were alive today, he would probably be jailed. He would probably be called an anti-national. Now, your grandfather, post his work in the freedom movement and so on, that streak of defiance continued, right? And that's something I want you to talk about. You know, how he was a newspaper editor running a very successful newspaper and so on. But then he did hold on to certain values which I would like to think he picked up in the revolutionary movement. Perhaps you could talk to the audience about some of the interesting things that he did post-independence.
But I think same, uncompromising. And I think he picked that up from his father, who was the editor. And my great-grandfather once said, and I think it's so apt in today's media scene, that, newspaper journalists and editors are not vendors of news. We're not here to sell news. We are here to speak truth to power. And so this is what everybody in the family, and this book has been written with my father, so I'm actually a fourth-generation journalist. My father's also a journalist. And I think everyone has stood to those ideals, and we've paid for it. We're still, even in my generation now, I'm paying for, speaking up. But even post-independence, like you said, things didn't kind of go calmly. Immediately, you set another newspaper. There's a second Hindi newspaper was launched in the 1950s, and then came the emergency, which again my grandfather said that by that time he was the editor, and he said, look, I haven't bowed down to the British. Every other day, the British were penalizing the paper. Those days, 10,000 rupees a week was a lot of money, right? I mean, the newspaper was suspended a couple of times for as long as a year, and was not allowed to report on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre because it was suspended. So my grandfather said that, look, I've not bowed down to the British, I'm not bowing down to an independent Indian government. And so he stopped writing his editorials. And in fact, Pratap was the first newspaper. So this is what happens with regional stuff. The focus has always been on, say, the Indian Express. So we'll speak about how the Indian Express went with the blank front page. But actually, the first call came to Pratap in Punjab. And this is how my uncle, who was in office that time, is when he immediately called up Kuldeep Nayyar, who then called up George Fernandes, and a lot of these leaders went underground. But my grandfather said, look, we are going to go with the blank newspaper. There is no way that I will get this censored. And 2 or 3 days later, he was told, this is not done. You can't go on with this. So he said, okay, and I'll bore everybody. I'll bore the censors. But he still refused to write an editorial. And so some serialized mythology he started putting out. He said, let everybody go to sleep. The censors are going to find nothing wrong in this. And of course they didn't. But there was a financial cost to it. By that time, Punjab, Jalandhar had become a hub of the media. So all the Punjabi press from pre-independent India had moved there. About 13, 14 newspapers. And when out of 14, say 13 are taking out the editorial, then that one person has to pay the price. And so that price kind of continued. Then came, as I said, then came militancy, which then again my grandfather said, I'm not going to bow down to these people. And day after day, there were threats to him, to my father, every second day. I mean, we didn't go to school for a year. We were withdrawn from school because there was a threat to kidnap us. And so that, as I said, culminated in a blast, in a parcel bomb being sent to the office and exploding. After that as well, it was the same story of not compromising through and then to pay a price for it. There's corporatization. I always ask my father, what if Pratap was alive and working and, fully functioning in today's environment? What would, how would you see it? And he says it would have been long closed if we hadn't closed it already.
Uncompromising, you said. A world of difference between...
Sometimes it's foolhardy also, isn't it, Karthik?
No, I'd like to think of him as a good person. Uncompromising is good. No, I'm saying this in part because when one looks at the state of the media today and one compares it with what your grandfather chose to do, I think it was not foolhardy. It was very, very courageous indeed. I'm sure that many in the audience would agree as well.
No, I think so. I think where we started and where we've come today, my father actually is extremely disillusioned. He's been in this profession 50 years. And I worked for NDTV for 15 years. And to where anybody who comes to me and says, oh my God, what's happened to your NDTV? I always say, it's not NDTV. It's a shell. It's just got the name. Now call it for what it is. And unfortunately, television news has ruined journalism for us. Absolutely. And it's also, I'd also say that there's a little bit of a blame on middle class India as well, Karthik. If we don't go back to watching the same stuff that they peddle out, which is misinformation, which is, which is hate. If you take, say, Aryan Khan, or you take Riya Chakravarti, or you take Operation Sindoor, Karachi fort has been taken, or General Munir is in our custody, and 2 days later you realize that it was wrong, but there's no apology that comes from these newspapers from the media. And yet, every evening you would go and sit in front of the same channel and their advertisements keep coming. Then there's something to be said for what we are consuming as well, right? If we are consuming what they're selling us, why would this stop?
No, talking about disillusionment, one disillusioning factor in the story, and that I'm sure struck you very early on, is for all their talk of freedom and all these big things, Chatto and Roy treated the women in their life very, very callously. It was not pleasant reading that.
Yeah. I talk up a lot about this in my book, because in many of the other books on Chatto and Roy, nobody talks about the women behind the men and who had to pay the price. So I talk a lot about it. And it's true, they were so, liberal and believed in liberation, equality, etc., out in the world. But at home, they weren't able to do that. And I think that's a theme that runs through history, really. It's very easy to say, I want my wife to be fabulous and educated and go out there. But it's not that easy when you want chai and you want your wife to make it for you and you don't know how to make it yourself, right? So Chatto actually had a very long and toxic and tumultuous relationship with a very interesting woman called Agnes Smedley, who has a whole chapter in my book. And she was a journalist, activist, and very sympathetic to the Indian freedom movement, which is why she got involved with Chatto in Berlin. And they lived together there, but he basically treated her like a household drudge. He made her cook and clean for all the vast crowds of revolutionaries who would pass through Berlin. He would not let her do her own writing. There are rumors of, she claimed that he was very jealous of all her previous, affairs and previous lovers. So eventually they split up, and she went on to do great things. She became a war correspondent, and she went to China and marched with Mao. And was eventually, when she passed away, she was buried in China. And so, they had just this toxic relationship, and it was perhaps better for them that they went their separate ways. And then Chatto eventually ended up marrying a Russian woman and living in Moscow, and then, he was executed without any warning. And Emin Roy had 2 wives. He had a stream of revolutionary women after him, because Emin Roy had sort of film star good looks. I'm sorry to sound so shallow, but then, I'm a popular historian, so I can get away with saying things like this. I'm not a scholar. So he was, and lots of people have said this, an incredibly good-looking, charismatic, man. And lots of women around him. His first wife was an American woman called Evelyn Trent, who completely subordinated her entire life to him, which was a mistake on her part, because eventually he ended up breaking up with her, and she was very sad about this. He dumped her. And because she had basically sacrificed her entire life, moved around the world, been pursued by police, all for him. She went back to the US, and he eventually married another woman called Ellen Gottschalk, who was a German woman. She also subordinated her entire life to him. She gave up writing. She was basically his glorified secretary. And when he passed away, she said, I wish I hadn't given up my entire life to basically be Emin Roy's secretary. But the thing is, when he walked into the room, you just forgot everything. And you just wanted to help him in any way possible. Ellen Roy came to a very brutal end. She was murdered in Dehradun. Because by ostensibly in a robbery. There are rumors about that, but I think it was a robbery. So, and they were just sort of in the periphery of these men's lives, really. Sort of sacrificing everything for them and getting not much in return. And of course, Agnes Smedley managed to escape this by leaving, and then she achieved great things in her own right. So, yeah.
Shall we take questions now? Yeah? We have about 5 minutes. So there's a gentleman here who wants to ask a question?
Chick.
No, I think the audience will lead the mic. No, please. Just one question, if you don't mind, so that we can have more questions.
Sure. Jyotsna, I'm from Kanpur. So there has been another illustrious newspaper called Pratap, Ganesh Shankar Vidyarthi. And also, I have known Subhashni Ali, her mother also. Unfortunately, I went into science because I grew up in a place where you can't be anything else. But I wanted to be in history. This is my word. And Karthik started with that about whether the revolutionaries, and we now in fact hear it on Facebook and other places that if revolutionaries would have succeeded, we would have a different India. And I have a different view. In fact, let's believe if Bose was able to conquer India, we possibly, and believing that, Nazi forces would have made that consequence, this India would have been very different. I think, ma'am answered that. I wanted to know from you, what is your view about it? Let's say if we would have had, revolutionaries would have that scale and were able to do India. We've seen, in fact, democracies have not succeeded.
Sure.
When
Can you allow her to respond? Because we want more questions.
Just one, if independence would have been achieved by force, not by peaceful means.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at the end of it all, the revolutionaries were very aware of one thing, that they respected Gandhi immensely, even though, and I was telling Karthik this, there's a question on whether Gandhi did enough to save the revolutionaries. The idea was that if by default the British government is going against us and the popular opinion goes against us, then the opinion will go towards Gandhi. So it is a win-win for the revolutionaries. But yes, in my opinion, to answer that question that you'd asked earlier, if the revolutionaries had been able to mobilize themselves better, I think they would have put more pressure, harder pressure, and not the sporadic incidents that happened to define revolutionary movement in India. I think a coherent movement would have added more pressure for Gandhi to have accepted, not wait for that dominant status, to give it the 2 years that it gave for it, and perhaps things would have been, so to speak, they would have happened a little bit more quicker. Whether that would have translated into the India that we want today, I don't think anybody can see, because I think a lot of us could not have ever imagined the India that we are seeing today.
Thank you. Your questions, sir.
Yeah, I'll be brief. M.N. Roy, as you said, had a very exciting life, and we've read all of that. What happened for the last 7-8 years? He formed that Indian Renaissance something in Dehradun, and nothing happened for the last 8-9 years. So why that change for somebody who had such an exciting life? Was it age? Was it ill health? I just find the anticlimax to his exciting life at the end.
Well, he was imprisoned in brutal conditions for 6 years, and that did really break his health. And when he came out, he tried to, go with the Congress. By then, he was a lapsed communist. He didn't believe in communism anymore. He thought that only Congress can get unity. But as I said, Gandhi and him just could not get along. He could not compromise, with Gandhi's principles. And therefore, he was eventually sort of elbowed out, and he founded the principle of radical humanism, which I said is a very idealistic philosophy. No religion. He didn't even believe in elections. This is where I differ with him. Okay, and he believed in a sort of quite an elitist model of governance, with no religion, no caste, and all that. And in 1947 India, that was just not practical. It's not even practical now. We're still voting by religion, caste, and the other things like that. So he spent the last few years of his life building, radical humanism, and he had disciples. And he did, one of his successes, I think, was that he did influence the trade union movement very much. Many of his disciples went on to form the first trade unions. Maniben Kara, who was one of the first women trade union leaders, V.B. Karnik, and many others whom I've mentioned. And so he influenced trade unions, he influenced, a different way of thinking, as I say in the book. And it may not have succeeded, but it's good to remember that, because as we see now, after so many years of independence, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer, which is what M.N. Roy predicted.
Your question, last question.
Ma'am, you talked about your grandfather, and you talked about how basically he was very steadfast in his beliefs and how he kept everything. Now, my question, which we can see today, it doesn't really go. Nobody has that same steadfastness. So my question is about the family. So you talked about so many things that you guys had to go through. Did that affect you negatively, or did it make you just believe more that I also have to live with these certain morals, certain ethics, and that's the only way to go about things?
In the 1980s, and I was 10 years old then, when the terrorism was at its peak, there was a lot of talk about exodus from Punjab. And a lot of people came up to my family and said, we think you should leave. The police told them you should leave. And my grandfather said, look, we left once. We're not going to leave again. And that I think has defined us through and through, and something I've never been scared. Sometimes I have to take a step back. I do have 2 girls and a husband. And I have to please my husband, so there are a lot of things I don't tell him, how I speak, or I'm really grateful he's not on social media. But I always said that my legacy is one of defiance. And my legacy is it's actually very simple to speak up. I find it fascinating that more of us have stopped doing it. Because the simplicity is, how tough can it be? It's the truth. And I really wish more and more people would come together, because there are a lot of people who fire from our shoulders, the remaining few who left to speak up. And we'd really like a collective of people to come up. So no, I've never thought about it. My mother would like me to tone down a bit though.
So it's a good note to conclude on. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your very thoughtful questions. Request from a publisher who had the pleasure of talking to 2 authors. Please do buy and read the books. I trust me, you will not be disappointed. Thank you so much.
Please, guys, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.